Hello, welcome back to Learn Oikonomia. Today we are going to discuss the first chapter of macroeconomics when it comes to class 12. We are following the ncert syllabus. So chapter 1 of macroeconomics for class 12 is titled as Introduction. This is an introductory chapter. Let's get started to see what is there in this chapter. So we have already made a lot of discussion when it comes to microeconomics. We have seen what microeconomics is all about, and having discussed or having said so, we are going to see what macroeconomics is. Let's see about macroeconomics. So macroeconomics is something, first of all, which differs from the concept of microeconomics, and the difference is something that we have already discussed in the previous session, where we discussed the introductory section of microeconomics. We could see that macroeconomics is something which takes economics from a totality perspective. We will deal with the total income, the aggregate expenditure, the aggregate revenue. Everything is considered in aggregate form when it comes to macroeconomics. But the basic questions when it comes to the study of macroeconomics, this is something that would almost the same. The only difference is with respect to the aggregates and individual units. Now let's come to see what are the questions which we discuss in the arena of macroeconomics. So now we are going to see the broad economic questions when it comes to the arena of macroeconomics. So it is asked, will the prices as a whole rise or come down? So what would happen when it comes to prices? So whether the price, that is inflation, this is something that would happen in the economy, or whether there is deflation in the economy. Increase in price means sustained increase in price means inflation, sustained fall in price means deflation. That is the subject matter of macroeconomics. Then another question that we can ask in macroeconomics is related to the employment condition. So the question can be formed like this: is the employment condition of a country as a whole or of some sectors of the economy getting better, or is it worsening? Another question when it comes to macroeconomics can be like, what would be the reasonable indicators to show the economy in order to say whether the economy is getting better or whether the economy is getting worse? Another question can be in relation to the steps that every economic state or every nation can take. So this might deal with what steps, if any, can the state take or the people ask for in order to improve the state of economy. So these can be certain questions where macroeconomics comes into picture. Having said so, we can see that all these kinds of questions which we have already discussed would make us think about the health of the country's economy as a whole. We are not concerned about the individual economic units in macroeconomics, but we are considering the economy in its totality. Whether it is employment, whether it is prices, whether it is any other aspect, we are considering these in its totality form or its total form. We are considering the economy as a whole here. So these questions are dealt with in when it comes to macroeconomics, and these questions would definitely have different levels of complexity. The case of employment is different from the case of prices, and this is different from the case of revenue. This is something which is different from the case of expenditure. So everything would show differences with each other. The basic principles of macroeconomic analysis deals with all these kinds of things. And whatever be the subject of study in macroeconomics, whether it is employment or whether it is prices or whatever it may be, we are considering the case of the country as a whole. When it comes to employment, we would be considering the aggregate employment scenario in our economy. When it comes to prices, we refer to the aggregate price level in the economy. So we are actually considering the economic situation in its totality. That is what macroeconomics is. And when it comes to output, we would be discussing the aggregate output in the economy. And we can see that the output levels of all the goods and services in the economy have got a tendency to move together. And if you take the example of output of food grain, we can see that this is experiencing a growth, and this is mainly accompanied by an increase in the output level of industrial goods as well. Because in some cases, especially when it comes to agro-based industries and all, increase in agriculture growth can definitely lead to increase in industrial growth as well. So within the category of industrial goods, also output of different kinds of goods tend to rise or fall simultaneously. And also when it comes to prices, we can see that prices of different types of goods as well as different types of services can have a general tendency of rising or falling. That too will happen simultaneously. Now coming to the employment level, also we can see that employment in different production units, that also will go up or go down together. That too will happen simultaneously. Coming to the case of aggregate output, which is an important aspect when it comes to macroeconomics, this aggregate output level, or another important aspect in the case of macroeconomics is price level. Another important aspect of macroeconomics is employment level. So all these kinds of things are actually having some relationship with each other, and for the same reason, we can see that we have to analyze the economy as a whole, or we have to consider the entire economy, or we have to consider the economic in its totality, or we have to consider the economy in the form of aggregates. So that might be considered as something which is quite easy rather than considering the individual economic units. So instead of dealing with these kinds of variables at disaggregated levels, it is better to consider the case of goods and services which is produced in the economy in its totality. That is what we do in macroeconomics, and this kind of aggregate level of understanding economics is something that helps us to see our economy in totality. This kind of version of economics will definitely have a level of production which will correspond to the average level of production of all the goods and services. That this will give us an overall picture of our economy. So when it comes to the price, or when it comes to employment level, we can see that this is something that reflects the general price level, because we are considering the case of total price level or total employment, that is aggregate price level or aggregate employment. So in that case, we will get an idea related to the general situation in the economy. And in macroeconomics, we are actually considering the country's total production rather than considering the production of a single sector, and we are considering the total employment rather than considering employment in a single sector, and we are actually considering all these variables like prices, rate of interest, wages, profit, etc. in its totality rather than seeing it in individual perspective. Now, what would happen to many real commodities that are actually bought and sold in the market? So we have to see that we generally see what happens to prices, interest, wages, etc. Whenever there is some commodity fluctuations in the market. We could see that when these kinds of attributes starts changing fast, prices would definitely have its impact. Also, employment would also has its impact. Production level could also get affected. Because we are considering economy in totality, we can see that all these variables are actually connected in some or the other form. We know that economy sectors, economy in its totality is actually divided into different sectors: the primary sector, industrial sector, and the tertiary sector. And in certain cases, we can see there is some interdependence of different sectors in the economy. One sector would be dependent upon the other sector, and this too should be considered when it comes to macroeconomics. While moving away from different goods and focusing on the representative good, this is something which is considered to be convenient for a certain section, but this can be considered for this is considered as a overlooking kind of thing for some other people or some other goods. Just take an example. We are going for production conditions of agriculture as well as industrial commodities. Okay, agriculture as well as industrial commodities. And here we might be unable to distinguish the kind of labor that these sectors would be used. So we can see that there can be labor of the manager of a firm from the labor of the accountant of a firm. So there exists differences between these two things. We have to consider that a single representative category of good might take a handful of different kinds of goods. So we have to understand this difference, or we have to understand this relation also. Just take an example of agriculture goods and industrial goods, also the service related goods. So there can be a representative of all the commodities which is being produced within the economy, which will be composed of agriculture goods, industrial goods, and service related goods. So these could also have different production related technology and different prices. The price of agriculture good is actually different from the price of industrial good, and the price of industrial good is something which is different from the price of service sector related good. And also when it comes to production technology, the technology for production which is used in the agriculture sector is entirely different from the production technology that is used in the industrial sector, and that would be entirely different from that is used in the service sector. So macroeconomics, this subject also tries to analyze how individual output levels, how prices, as well as how employment levels of these different sectors and goods would get determined in the market. When it comes to microeconomics, we can see that we would be dealing with what is known as individual economic units rather than considering economy in its totality. And micro, as we all know, this is something that means small, and consumers actually in microeconomics, from the perspective of microeconomics, they would be choosing some optimum combination of goods in order to buy these goods, and this was something that depend upon their taste, their income, etc. So we will discuss all these things in detail when we discuss the concept of demand in microeconomics. So now we are not going to the detail of this. So microeconomics, as we have already seen, this is a study of individual market. This is a study of individual players. This is a study of individual decision makers. So everything is considered in its individual form. So we know that producers are some people who would try to maximize their profit, and when it comes to consumers, they would be maximizing their personal satisfaction. This is what we can see in the from the perspective of microeconomics. And when it comes to a large company, so even a large company was micro in the sense that it had to act in the interest of its own shareholders. So this is something which is necessarily the interest of the country as a whole as well. Now, for microeconomics, the macroeconomic phenomena affecting the economy as a whole, like inflation, unemployment, were either not mentioned or were not taken, or they were not. They were considered. These things are considered as given. They are not considered as variables that individual buyers or sellers could change. These were not variables that individual buyers or sellers could change. Okay, so just try to see the economic agents. What is meant by economic agent, or who are economic agents? Let's see that. So economic agents would comprise of the economic units, or that would actually deal with the institutions, that would deal with the individuals, etc., who would be taking some economic decisions. So these are economic agents. So these can be consumers, because these people who would be deciding what and how much to consume, and this can be producers as well. Why? Because these people are producing goods and services who would decide what and how much to produce, and they may be entities. So there can be actually entities like government, there can be entities like corporation, there can be entities like banks, they also would take different economic decisions, and they would also, these decisions would also determine how much to spend, what rate of interest to be charged from credits, and how much tax is to be taken from the public. So these agencies or these entities can, or these institutions can also be considered as economic units. Now, having discussed a lot about some introductory part of macroeconomics, let's see of the details of a famous person, that is Adam Smith. As we all know, he is the founding father of modern economics, and this person is actually he was a professor of University of Glasgow, and also he was a philosopher by training. He had written a very famous book which is titled as Enquiry into the Nature and Cause of Wealth of Nation, which came to be a what to say, activity done by Adam Smith, or revolutionary aspect when it comes to the evolution of economics as a separate discipline. Now, just come back and see what is there to discuss about macroeconomics. And macroeconomics is something that would try to address different situations that the economy would be facing, and we would be considering the economy as a whole, and we try to see economy as a whole would be facing which all problems. Adam Smith could suggest that if buyers and sellers in each market take their decision by following their self-interest, then the interest of the whole economy would be taken care of. And we have to see that when it comes to economists, they will not need to think the wealth and welfare of the economy, wealth and welfare of different country separately. Rather, they have to consider the wealth and welfare of the whole world. But economists, they gradually could discover that they had to look further in order to understand our economy. Economists could understand that in certain cases market did not, or market could not exist. We know that it is the demand and supply, that which is known as the market forces, that would be influencing our market conditions. The market can exist or it could fail in certain cases. But in certain cases, you can see that there can be equilibrium between demand and supply. In certain number of situations, society would be decided to pursue certain important social cause, and this too happened unselfishly. And in such cases, there can be some aggregate effects in the economy. Macroeconomics is something that would study the effects in the market of some taxation as well as budgetary policies. So whenever any government goes for, any government in the sense that the government of any country goes for taxation and budgetary policies, these would affect each and every citizen of the country. And also, when the central bank of an economy, in the case of India, it is the Reserve Bank. So when it goes for changes in money supply, rate of interest, wages, employment, output related decisions, this would have an impact on the economy as a whole. So macroeconomics, it would be having some deep roots in microeconomics, and this is because we have to study the aggregate effects of demand and supply in the market only. And also we can see that it would be something to deal with the policies which would be helping us to modify these kinds of market forces, and this would also help us to follow the choices made by society which is outside the market. When it comes to developing economy like India, these kinds of choices have to be made, or remove or reduce different problems that our economy is facing. This would include unemployment, and also this would include poverty like situations, and also this would be helping us to improve access to education, health, administration related things, etc. Now, macroeconomics is something that helps us to see the simple characteristics that are very much evident with the different situations. For example, it would be dealing with who are the macroeconomic decision makers, or else who would be the players when it comes to macroeconomics. The macroeconomics policies are actually taken by either by the state government, or else it would be taken by certain statutory bodies like Reserve Bank of India or the Securities and Exchange Board of India, in order to deal with their respective areas. Or these kinds of bodies will have one or more public goals in order to deal with different needs and wants, which would be defined by the law or constitution of India itself. Now, these kinds of goals are actually not those goals of individual economic agents, because individual economic units would be trying to maximize their private profit motive. And as a result, we have to see that the macroeconomic agents that we have to see, this is something which is entirely different from the individual decision makers or microeconomic agents. Secondly, we could see that what do macroeconomic decision makers try to do? What is their involvement in the society or economy? So they have to actually go beyond different economic objectives in order to try to direct, as well as try to direct the use of or deployment of economic resources for some public needs. And these activities are actually not aimed at serving the individual self-interest. We have to see that when it comes to macroeconomics, we are just concerned about the economy as a whole rather than going for the individual self-interest. So macroeconomics is something that deals with the welfare of the whole country, or the people of the country, whole population of the country. Now, coming to the emergence of macroeconomics, what had led to the emergence of macroeconomics? So, this macroeconomics as a separate branch of economics has emerged after a famous economist, John Maynard Keynes, published his famous work that is titled as the General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, and this was published in 1936. So he had Keynes had actually dominated the thinking when it comes to macroeconomics, and that doesn't mean that there was no thinking regarding economics before Keynes. The dominant thinking in economics before Keynes was that all the laborers who are ready to work will find employment, and all the factories would be working their full capacity. And this idea was given by classical tradition. Let's see what is there when it comes to John Maynard Keynes. So this person is a British economist, and he was born in 1883, and apart from being a sharp intellectual, he had played a very important role when it comes to international diplomacy. And this was something which happened in the years following the First World War. He was trying to deal with the peace agreement of war in the book The Economic Consequences of Peace, which was published in 1919. Then in the book General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, this is something which is considered as one of the influential economics books. And he was actually a person who had involved in a foreign currency speculation, or that is why he is known as a foreign currency speculator. Now we can see that there was a problem which happened during the 1930s, or by the end of 1929. This is known as Great Depression. Great Depression of 1929 or 1930. And after this depression, we could see that in the subsequent years after depression, there was some problems with the level of output and employment levels. This is mainly seen in different countries of Europe and North America. It could affect the entire world as well. Here, what had happened was that there was less demand for commodities in the market. There was no production happening in factories. Many factories were lying as idle. So many people were thrown out of jobs. This was the problem that happened during 1930s. So in USA, if you see from 1929 to 1933, there was a huge unemployment situation. Unemployment could rise from or unemployment could rise from 3% to 25%. That was the scenario. And over the same period, output also fell in USA, and economists were thinking about the functioning of the economy as a result of these problems. And Keynes was actually trying to offer a solution to this, and solution was given in his General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money book. Unlike all his predecessors, Keynes' approach was to determine the working of the economy in its totality, and he was trying to see the interdependence of different sectors in the economy, and the subject of macroeconomics was born in such a fashion. So that's all about the first chapter of macroeconomics for you. And I request you to like, share and subscribe to this channel for more videos, and you can also be a part of my Telegram channel and Telegram group. I'll be providing the links of these in the description box. That's all. Thank you.